Is this thing on? Hello, friends, and welcome to the Queerly Faithful podcast, where on every first Monday of the month, we push against the norms of Christianity and culture from a queer, progressive Christian perspective. I am Pastor Casey, the Queerly Faithful pastor, and this is the Queerly Faithful podcast. Welcome to the show. Today, I am so excited to be with my dear friend, Ryan Casata, who is a musician, who is a seminarian, who is a faithful follower of Jesus, and a passionate, creative individual. There's so much to say about you, dear friend, that I'm sure I'm not even giving you all the credit that is deserved. But I am so glad to have you this morning. How are you?
Thank you so much, Pastor Casey. I'm very excited to be here.
So the way that we connected was through our dear friend Casey Shane, who said, I know this really amazing musician who is going to seminary, etc., etc. And we connected, and I feel like we hit it off immediately. And you had the opportunity to come to my church to do a concert there where you met some of my LGBT youth. For those of you that may not know, I run a support group for LGBT teenagers in Placer County called The Landing Spot. And some of those kids were just like overwhelmed meeting Ryan Casata. I mean, big joy to meet such a superstar in the LGBT community. And then you came and preached at Loomis UCC. And so I'm excited. Maybe I'm sure throughout our conversation, some of that will bubble up. So Ryan Casata, what is it like to be you? Tell me a little bit about yourself. I know you're engaged, but just tell us a little bit about who you are.
Sure. Well, I think who I am mostly and what defines me the most of everything is that I'm a songwriter. And that has been my truth since I was 12 years old, and it's helped to drive everything I've done, and it's helped to land me where I am. If I wasn't a songwriter, I wouldn't be in Los Angeles. I wouldn't have been comfortable enough to do activist speeches without bringing my music to it. And music is also like what has been one of the most biggest parts of my faith as well. So being a musician, being a songwriter, that is like what's at the core of my heart. And it's how I express myself in every single way. It's how I express love. It's how I express gratitude. It's how I express my faith. So, I mean, when it comes down to it, like that's who I am. And I'm also queer and trans, and I've been out for a very, very long time now, over half of my life, and that's also who I am. And yeah, I'm engaged and I'm in a happy relationship, and I get to live my dream, like touring the country and playing music and speaking and doing activism work and connecting with queer people and allies all over the world.
That's beautiful. So 12 years old, you started writing music. What led you to do that? Did you play an instrument at that time? Like what drew you to writing music?
I started playing the guitar when I was 6 years old.
Wow.
And there was a guitar in my family's house that no one was playing. My older brother had tried to play it and just gave up pretty quickly. And so there was just like a guitar collecting dust. And I think I begged my parents for about a year to let me play it and have lessons. And eventually my mom was like, okay, like you've been persistent about this for a really long time. Like, and the music teacher from my elementary school built me a guitar because I was so small that he had to build like a tiny guitar for me. And yeah, that's how it all started. And the songs, I mean, they just came. I mean, it was completely natural. I was never like, oh, I'm just gonna write a song, and it just happened. And for the first like year or so of writing songs, I was just like, oh, everyone writes songs. Like, this is what people do in their room. They just like write songs. And that's just like what I thought. And then I was like, oh, this is like weird that I write songs and that I can write songs. And I mean, I have no idea like how to write songs. I didn't take a class. I never like looked up a video on how to do it or anything. Like I just could do it. And that's how it's been. And it's been a huge blessing in my life.
I love hearing you say that this is sort of like a path that you have taken on your own, right? There was no formal training. You didn't look up a video, as you said, but this has been like, the words of your heart manifest into beautiful music. And I think that's really an important thing to note around, like, for any of us who are afraid to pick things up or who are concerned that we're not doing it the right way. The freedom in just saying, this is your craft, this is your creative outlet, and we all should spend less time worrying about how well or how right we are doing it, and instead really just attempting to do the thing we love or we want to learn to do, to express how we feel.
Exactly. And I think when you're like a little kid, you're more willing to do whatever. Like there's no rules formed in your head yet of how to do things or what you should be doing. So like we have to honor that little kid inside of all of us, and maybe that's what gets you to do the thing that you really are feeling called to do.
Right, like podcasting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Ryan, talk to me about coming out as trans, because these things run parallel, I guess, in my brain for you, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, when I was 12 years old is when I came out as bisexual, and that was just like a truth that I knew about myself. It wasn't like some like massive self-discovery. It was just something that I knew, as the same as like I knew my favorite color and I knew what my favorite food was, and it was just apparent. And around like age 13, especially like when puberty started to hit and my body started changing in ways that didn't make sense to me, I realized I was trans. And at that time there was like barely anyone out. There was like 6 YouTubers online and that was it. And there was one website where I could find information, and I think I Googled something about feeling like I was in the wrong body, and I realized that trans was a thing. And there was a guy at the LGBT center that is trans, but he was like older than me, and I didn't know any young people that were transitioning. When I met this other trans guy, I just realized like, oh, okay, this is like who I am too. And I Googled it and found this like one website. It was called Hudson's Guide.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. That was like all the information that there was on it, on everything.
What year was that?
This was I started in 2008 coming out as trans. So it was a different world back then.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, coming out as trans when no one else is out, like I was the first to come out in my school, which leads to being the first one to have these like certain issues, like which bathroom am I going to use, and am I allowed to go to gym class, and all of these things. Like, are people going to call me the right name and pronouns, and all of these like very basic human rights I didn't have. And so I was pushed into being an activist at 13 years old so that I could continue to go to school. And I spent my high school career like educating my high school. I was like frequently with a petition in the hallway, and like my coming out experience, like I was on international television at 15 talking about being trans on Larry King. So my coming out experience is like different than most people's. It's been a gift because it's connected me with a lot of people, but it's also been like very heavy to carry and unpack, and also like get people to see that like, hey, I'm 28 years old now, and I'm not 15-year-old Ryan that was on Larry King, you know?
Right. Well, and I think that's something, Ryan, I really want to emphasize is like there were no adults in your life. I mean, I'm sure there were adults in your life who stood with you in solidarity, but it was not adults who were doing the work of making this space safe for you. It was you making the space safe for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I experienced that so much with the young people I work with, where it's like they're, and Gen Z in general, honestly, the Gen Z young people, it's like they're looking around the world, everything is on fire. And the adults, the people, the ancestors, the adults, the role models are not doing anything. And so we see young people who are having to advocate for themselves to make the world at least tolerable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I hear these sorts of stories all the time from young people in my community, trans youth who are like, I have to go and ask about the bathroom. The anxiety of parents who have to like prepare the teachers for their kid just showing up to school. I'm sure you hear crazier stories than I do from young people all over the country and all around the world, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
But this sense of like you have to advocate for yourself. So how did you end up on Larry King? Like that's a pretty big jump from being 12 years old and being like, yeah, I think I'm bisexual and trans to 15 years old on Larry King.
Yeah. Well, I started speaking at schools when I was really young. So when I was 13, I joined the Safe Schools team at the Long Island Gay and Lesbian Youth Center, and they educated us and helped us to become professional speakers. And I was naturally good at speaking in front of an audience and sharing my story. So quickly, like within like a few months, I became the speaker of the group who like would lead. And I like was the keynote speaker at their events. And then first it was the Tyra Banks show that reached out to the LGBT Center looking for someone to go and represent the LGBTQ community. And I actually turned that appearance down at first because Tyra Banks didn't want me to be out as trans.
Wow.
on the show. So I turned that down, but those same producers were working with Larry King, and they called too, and they said we need someone to come on the show, and I was like, I'll come on as Ryan, and that worked. And eventually I did go on the Tyra Banks show about a year later. But all of that like stemmed from my early activism, like going into schools where most of the students were older than me and educating them.
Yeah. So what did your parents think about all this? I mean, I'm sure they look for most parents whose children are coming out, right? There's this overwhelming experience for them. And to have your family thrown into the spotlight on a national stage, international really, I'm sure there was a lot of hard conversations.
Yeah, it's definitely it's been weird at times. My dad's like a super private person and has tried for the most part to like avoid the spotlight his whole life. And he like of course like the most popular song I write is about him, and like
Right.
that, that's not planned, it just happened. But I mean, both my parents are like very proud of me and everything, and at the time I remember, I mean, I'm having conversations with my parents, like I'm 16, 17 years old, and I'm going into areas of the country that are conservative, and I'm speaking in front of dozens of people, hundreds of people, and I'm having conversations with my parents like, if I get killed tonight, can you release all my demos? And like I literally had like a folder on my computer of demos that like my mom knew, like put them all out if something happened to me. And as a teenager, like you shouldn't have to think about that at all. And that was very real,
Yeah. Yeah.
there was speeches that I did back then where like security had to be called, and people were like taken out of the speeches because they were like yelling at me, and threatening violence. It was scary, and I knew that, and I knew what I was doing could kill me, but I knew that I had to do it, and I knew that for my community, I was willing to sacrifice anything. And for me, like that's a true activist, you know, is someone that's willing to surrender every single thing, including their life, for the movement.
I really am just so moved by hearing you say that. And what rings in my ears is Jesus saying, narrow is the road to life, and those that find it are few. Right? Like, your real life is found when you're willing to let go of your life for the sake of the cause. And that just is so moving to me. It's so compelling. You know, and for a lot of people who have found themselves in a variety of settings. I imagine there are many queer folks listening to this today who have at one moment or another felt the fear of having to tell the truth of their lives. Or there might be allies listening to this who have had at moments to stand up and tell the truth of their own lived experience in the ways that they support us or whatever topic. And it requires something of you. Whole living requires something of you. I am just thankful for your courage.
Thank you.
I imagine you were, as a teenager, exhausted by all the stuff you were doing.
Yeah, I was, but I also was a teenager with a lot of energy. I think I was 17, and I went to New Jersey for a month to speak at as many schools as I could there.
Mm-hmm.
And this family that had a trans kid let me crash in their basement for the month. And I would go into these high schools and speak like every period. So it'd be like 40-minute speech, 4-minute break, 40-minute speech, 4-minute break, like 5 of those a day on like 2 hours of sleep because I was driving and, you know, had to make it to the next thing. But like after I did that, I was like, all right, like if I could do this, I could do anything, I could do more. And I just kept pushing the limits, you know, and that like didn't catch up with me. Like that exhaustion didn't catch up with me. I didn't realize it until the shelter in place. And when the shelter in place happened for COVID, my tour was canceled. I was going to be out for 30 days and doing a lot of like activism work and music, and like all that was canceled. And like finally I had a break for the first time in over 10 years. And I didn't realize how much I needed that break, and I needed to process everything and unpack everything. But I needed it. And I mean, being an activist, like the one thing that I wish I knew when I was younger was that you need to make time for your mental health. Like you need to rest, you need to have self-care, like really well. And that has been something that I've learned at Pacific School of Religion, really, is how to do that, because there needs to be a balance or you burn out and you can't continue to be an activist.
Yep. That is so true. Many people I know who are in caring professions or in nonprofit work are there because we have big hearts and we believe we can change the world. Mm-hmm. Right? And what happens is that we give and give and give and give of ourselves, and we fail to take care of ourselves. And you know, and you hear this all the time, but that piece about like when the plane is crashing, baby, you put oxygen mask on for yourself and then for the people around you, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you're not taking the time to take a deep breath to tend to your own soul, you burn out, you become a toxic individual, right? I mean, you lack boundaries. I think COVID was the place that I learned a lot of that too. Mm. Like, I need to set time aside for myself so that I can be present to the people that I'm responsible for.
Yeah.
And if I don't do that, they suffer and I suffer. So tell me about, you mentioned Pacific School of Religion. Tell me about wanting to go to seminary. Did you grow up as a religious person? Like, how did all of that transpire?
Yeah, I did. I grew up going to Episcopalian school in the Catholic Church in my hometown. So I made like all the sacraments and did that whole thing. And really like I've realized that like there's two like major lies that I've been told my whole life since I've come out as trans. And like the first one is that God hates trans people, which is a lie. And the second one is that I won't find anyone to love me because I'm trans. And that's also a
Yeah.
lie. And I still live with those things inside of me. And I wanted like my drive for doing this work and doing ministry is to help other people not to carry those lies or to just like expel them before they happen, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because living with those, that's hard. Like that's something I struggle with every single day of my life still.
Yep.
So I really want to help LGBTQ people, especially the youth. The youth are the future. And I think the youth, they have a lot of power that people don't acknowledge, and they are the future. They are the leaders. They are now. They're the leaders now.
I was going to say they are the present.
Yeah.
They are the present. Yep.
They lead the movement.
Yep. They see the vision and they ask more of us, which is so important, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I had like a falling out with religion for a while, and I thought it wasn't for me and it couldn't be for me. And when I was going through mental health struggles, I just always had this like core belief inside of me, like everything's gonna work out. And for a long time I would just call it fate, and I was like that's what I would call God, because I was like not comfortable with the word God, and it took me a long time to be comfortable with the word God, but I always had this like belief inside of me. So that like never went away. Like maybe I labeled it different things, but I always felt that. And then randomly, like in 2017, I just like woke up one morning and was like, I wonder if there's like a gay church. Like, and I Googled it and found my church. And I keep the name private so a bunch of people don't go there to find me for the wrong reasons. But I found my church, and I have been going there ever since. And like that's helped to heal a lot for me. And the pastor that we had when I first got there was very, very inspiring to me. And then I made the connection between ministry and activism, and also music. Like literally, like I've been doing activism and music since I was a kid, and I'm like, oh, this makes perfect sense. Like these two things fused together, they make sense. They go together, and they go together really well in ministry work.
I think that is a really important point. And one of the things that I'm wondering about, is like in these days, in this the chaos of the world, like what is it that, as you are doing your justice work and your music and ministry, like how do you hope to fuse these things? One of the things that you'll hear people joke about, but it's true, it is that most pastors have one sermon they preach. There is like one heart song that they echo, and it sort of is the thread through their ministry and through their preaching, and you'll always hear it. And so through your music and through your own sense of call to pastor and through your justice work, what is it that you hope people hear?
I think for me, it's to be authentic, be authentically you. Like that's what I've been preaching, and feel that you can be that. Like the world can't stop you from being you, and we shouldn't feel shame in that. And that means like coming out, and it means playing music if that's what you love, and it means moving to whatever state you love. Like, it just means like doing what makes you happy, really. Like, follow your authenticity.
That's beautiful. What do you think it means to be a queer Christian in these days? Like, why is that so important?
I think it's important because I feel like Christianity has moved so far from what Jesus really taught. And I think like there's a lot of people that like practice so-called Christianity that are just, they're just haters, you know? And that's not Christian. And I think like being a queer Christian, it's like, okay, let's like reclaim this space that has always been for everyone, you know? Like for me, God is love and love is God, and it's like we as queer people, like we need that. Everyone needs that, and queer people need that too. And I believe in spreading that message because I think one, like queer people need to hear it to heal, but queer people also can use it to thrive.
You know, as we're talking, there are two things that really pop up for me in this conversation. The first being that the very first person to be baptized by the apostles after Jesus has sent them into the world to do the work of Christianity is an Ethiopian eunuch. The very first person is a Black queer person who shows up and is basically like, "Oh, you're gonna baptize me. I know these scriptures. They include me. So you just take me right on down right now." And so anybody who would want to say that these texts are not for queer people have not read Acts, right? They have not read the book of Acts clearly to understand that this message of Jesus, this message has always been about the radical welcome of all people. The second thing that I think is so important is the reality that like queer people have always been seen as sacred. Historically, before colonization, we were seen as the balance between the masculine and the feminine. We held that tension in a way that was sacred and affirmed in many indigenous communities. And so your invitation for queer people, for young people to tap into that sacredness, that belovedness, it's something that for so long we've had to do on our own. Right? Like that small whisper that washed over us as young people. You are queer. You are good. You are whole. That was wiped out of us by pastors, parents, whoever. It is like a reclaiming that I think we all long for.
Mm-hmm.
We all want to return to this still small voice that from the beginning formed us and called us. I don't know about you, but so many queer folks I know, they don't go to church. Many queer folks don't go to church, but they are some of the most religious people I know. And I think it is because there is something really sacred about this experience.
I agree.
So as you are proclaiming this message of authenticity and inclusion to your young people, to the young people who hear your music, to all people, what do you hope your music and art do for these kids? What are some experiences that you've had?
Yeah, I want queer youth to feel empowered to be themselves, and I want them to feel loved and supported. I want them to feel like they can accomplish anything because they can. And more recently, when I've been out on tour and doing these shows, I've brought people up from the audience to sing with me on stage, and I've just seen these queer youth transform in that experience, you know? From like looking shy in the audience to coming on stage and just being fully them and feeling empowered and happy, and those little moments, I've gotten feedback from them, and I've heard that they're big moments for a lot of people. And I've met queer people now, like from all over the world, and that have told me that my music and my message has impacted them and helped them to keep going and helped them to feel less alone and help them to chase after their dreams. And I'm like truly grateful for all of that. And it's not something that I'm like, oh, I need to do this or I want to do this. It's something that I just do. And I feel called to do it. And it's just part of who I am, and it's part of my ministry. And I think for as long as I live, like this is what I do. This is what I'm supposed to do. And that purpose like has always felt extremely clear to me.
I think it's so important for people to find the thing that drives them and draws them forward. Like, you know, I experienced some of that, and I'm fortunate to serve a church that lets me do all these things. Podcasting, traveling. You know, this summer I went to be with a progressive Christian church in the middle of a very conservative part of Illinois. Right? Like, this church invited me to come to teach Enneagram and preach, and I felt so called to be with them. And my church didn't bat an eye. They're like, go, you just go, Pastor Casey. Just go do it. And like you, I just feel like I can't get enough. Like, this is a part of the call. To go where God calls us and to meet people wherever they are, to affirm their goodness, to affirm their wholeness, to help them to know that regardless of where they are, that in this moment they are seen, known, and loved. I think that's so essential to the work in these days when everything feels like Christianity is being co-opted by a very different narrative. To have the queer religious leaders who are willing to go wherever it takes to let people know is really important. So I am grateful that you do that.
Thank you. I'm grateful that you do that as well.
So recently I saw a video on your Instagram where you said, as you looked into the beautiful sky, God is trans. I do not disagree, but I want to know how that is true for you. And this is an important moment, I think, in the podcast today, because people who are listening who are trans are going to sit up in their seat. People who are not are going to turn the knob up a little. And so as you prepare, Pastor Ryan, you know, to come into your own as clergy, I really am excited to hear your articulation of how God is trans.
Yeah, I have been practicing the belief that God is who we need God to be. And for me, and probably for a lot of other trans people as well, having the belief that God is trans or God is genderless or God is
queer AF.
Yeah, queer. Like, it feels more like unconditional love. Like, how could God judge me then, right? How could what these conservative people are saying be true, you know? And I feel that what our society, like especially like American culture, has done is like they assign God and Jesus to be a white cis guy. And I don't believe that's true. And I think that's a belief that needs to be smashed, and it's just been used to like reinforce the patriarchy and reinforce sexism and transphobia and homophobia, and we need to do away with that to move forward. So if as like a queer person, like I believe we are reflections of God, and if that's true, like we are good enough the way we are, and that could mean that God is trans or God is queer or God is a really awesome ally, right? So whatever helps a queer person to overcome that religious trauma, I believe like it's helpful. It's helpful theology, and theology changes too.
In our tradition, we say God is still speaking, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And look, and I grew up in a tradition. See, you got the Episcopalian thing, which is a lot less crazy than some of us who grew up evangelical, who had, old ladies waving swords over their head, proclaiming the Lion of Judah and speaking in tongues. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But in some of these evangelical churches, they say all the time, that God spoke this to them, whatever that crazy thing is. And yet they can't seem to wrap their head around the idea that maybe God is speaking to us too.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe God is still speaking, and God is broadening the horizon of what welcome looks like. And for those who are more conservative, who have limited God's love, and who have limited the vastness of God's radical mercy and grace, you might be confounded if you begin to believe that God is trans.
Mm-hmm.
Or, as you said, at least God is an ally to those who are queer. I think that is a fascinating invitation for anyone whose theology is far more limited than ours.
Yeah.
One of the things that, as for many people in the queer community, they struggle with is addiction. And I know that recovery is a big part of your journey. And I think that there are not enough queer people who are talking about that. And I'm curious to know what you would tell people, or what you would be willing to share about your own journey in recovery, and what your invitation for queer folks who are beginning to realize that maybe it's time to put the bottle down, or maybe it's time to let go of the party drugs for their own wholeness. I think that there are so many queer people who numb their pain with these things. And it's because because, first of all, it's because the only place that we could find queer community for generations, for decades, was in bars and in raves and clubs. That was the only place we could find community. But as we are evolving, and as queer people are beginning to find other spaces that they might meet people, I think there is a massive sense in which maybe we need to wake up a little bit. And so I wonder what you might share about that.
Yeah, I think, well, I will say that over the past few years, my definition of recovery has changed a lot, and it's not as black and white as it once was. And I struggled a lot when I was a teenager, and that was with mostly drugs and with self-harm. So I was involved in like a lot of self-harm behaviors, like including cutting and really anything that would hurt me. And that was the way I escaped. And I realized through a lot of therapy, and I had to do several different forms of therapy, and church wasn't enough, and I had to do DBT and talk therapy and psychotherapy and EMDR and heal a lot of my trauma to feel recovered. And now, for a very long time now, for years, I haven't involved myself in any self-harm behaviors. And I did originally see recovery as very black and white, like it's an all or nothing thing. And for maybe some people, it is. But now, 10 years later, after, I'm not a teenager anymore, and I've grown up and I've done all of this therapy, I've been able to be normal about substances, and I refuse to do any hard drugs, and hopefully I never will. But my relationship with sobriety has definitely transformed over the past year. And for me, recovery looks like avoiding all self-harm behaviors. And that's for each individual to decide like what is considered self-harm and what's not. And it's about having hard nose and really having a lot of self-reflection and getting the help you need when you need it. And for me, like, I thought therapy was like super embarrassing when I first started to go. And I thought I was like, oh no, I'm like totally at the bottom if I have to do all of this therapy. But the truth is, like, I've experienced a significant amount of trauma, physical, sexual, verbal, bullying, harassment when I was a teenager, when my brain was developing. And I had to recover from all of that, which took a very long time, to be able to be okay. And I encourage everyone to face that. And it's hard to face it. It brings up a lot. It brings up a lot of hard feelings that are very difficult to navigate, and they need to be navigated with professionals, with therapists, with doctors, with psychiatrists. Like, that is all so important. Like, I think support groups are great, but they're just supplements. Like, we need real help when we need it. And I definitely did. And that's what recovery has looked like for me recently. And after doing all this work, like going through all of this therapy work was extremely challenging. And I have PTSD, and it was extremely triggering to go through all of that work, and I went through it at my own pace.
Yeah.
And now I'm still going through it, but I feel on the other side now. And I mean, this past year, my mental health has been better than it's been since I was a little kid. And I feel happier than I've ever felt, really.
I love that for you.
And I think everyone could get there, but we need the self-reflection. We need to know what are the things that harm us, and just don't engage in those things, you know? But also, like, it's not just about not engaging them. It's about, what do we need to heal? What caused you to engage in those things the way that you were engaging in them, and heal that trauma so that you can move forward and you can be healthy and happy and live a productive, healthy life.
That is the most gracious, kind understanding of sobriety that I have ever heard.
Thank you.
And I super love that. Friends, I think it's really important for us to understand that, like, it's just not about doing the thing. It's about going to the root of why we did the thing in the first place. And if we are just to cut things out of our lives, it never actually heals the issue itself. Which leads us often to this sort of, I think, almost like a fundamentalist behavior around things. And it's because they have forgotten to have compassion for themselves in a way that says, I've went to the root. I've healed the thing, where I can even, that whole piece about forgiving oneself, right? It's supposed to start there. So I think that is the most generous response to sobriety I've ever heard, Ryan, and I am so grateful for you and for your ministry and for your music and for the gift that you are to all of us. You matter. Your impact on this world has been abundant.
Thank you.
So, Ryan, as we close out today, you said that you would be willing to offer us some music, and so what will you be playing?
Sure. I'll play a song called I Met Jesus at the Gay Pride Parade.
Amazing. Well, we look forward to hearing that. And thank you again for being with us today, Ryan.
Thank you.
The way that we will be closing out every episode, as we are just, you are episode 2 of this show, is we will be asking each person who is with us to sort of answer the question, what does it mean to be queerly faithful to you? And so I'm going to leave you with that question, Ryan. What does it mean to be queerly faithful to you?
I would say it's all about being authentic, loving your queerness, loving God, knowing that God is unconditional love and you are loved. And it's about staying true and staying you.
Stay true and staying you. Well, that will conclude our conversation for today. Add your voice to this particular conversation or to any of the episodes to come. You can comment on the show notes at thequeerlyfaithfulpastor.com. In the show notes, you'll find the relevant links and a complete list of all the ways to add your voice to this conversation, including the Faithful Talkback, which you can do every month by calling and leaving a voice message at 916-534-8163. As long as your message is thoughtful and not hateful, we will add your voice to the end of every episode. And with that, on the other side of the music, we will hear from you.
I met Jesus at the gay pride parade. He was praying for us to be free. A man with the Bible yelled hatefully, and Jesus countered by taking a knee. He said they're people just like you, and God loves them living out their truth. They are people just like you, and they deserve to live just as much as you. And they deserve to love just as much as you. I met Jesus on Sunset Boulevard, on a sidewalk of tents and poverty. He said, young brother, why'd you look the other way, away from the people who are starving and need to eat? They're people just like you, and they have dreams and struggles just like you do. And I love them how I love you, and they deserve to be here just as much as you. And they deserve to eat just as much as you. And they deserve to be here just as much as you. I met Jesus at our nation's capital. He was wiping tears from his eyes. He never wanted no war and hate, so he cried like I cried. At the racists who divide, using his name to justify their bigotry and white pride, their violence of who deserves to live and die. Jesus cried. Jesus cried. Jesus cried. Jesus cried. You must stop this hatred now and live to help one another out. You must strive for kindness now and learn to know what love is about. And learn to know what love is about. 'Cause they are people just like you, and God loves them living out their truth. They're people just like you, and they deserve to be here just as much as you. And they deserve to be here just as much as you.
Hello, hello. I am Selah, and I am so incredibly happy and grateful that the Queerly Faithful podcast has been born. I know Casey as a family friend, as a pastor, and as an amazing queer elder in the making. Today's young people do not have too many true elders to look to for guidance. And one thing that I've heard from my queer peers over and over again is that it seems as if there are no queer elders to look to for guidance and safety, which makes this podcast all the more valuable. I know that there are so many queer kids who have religious trauma, myself included, and podcasts like this one and voices like Casey's can and will serve as lighthouses, beckoning us towards healing, community, and connection. So please share it around your circles because Casey is really doing the good work with this one.
Thank you again, Ryan Casata, for your beautiful music. You are so talented. Thank you all for sharing your Queerly Faithful thoughts. If you enjoyed the Queerly Faithful podcast and would like to join the work we are doing, please consider leaving a review and or a comment and liking us on all the social media platforms. A shout out and thank you to the many people who make this podcast possible. To Jeff Manildi for his production help, for Ryan Casata for the music, and for you, the listeners, for making this dream come true. Peace out.